Good morning, everyone. See, Paul warmed you up. You're finally responding, right? For those that don't know who I am, I'm Reverend Barb Serta Warner, and I'm the clergy assistant to the bishop. And I have the privilege of introducing our Bible study leader this morning. Reverend Dr. Kenda Creasy Dean is the Mary D. Sunnott Professor of Youth, Church, and Culture at Princeton Theological Seminary. She is the author of numerous books, including Innovating for Love, Joining God's Expedition Through Christian Social Innovation, and Almost Christian, What the Faith of Our Teenagers is Telling the American Church. She is the co-founder of Ministry Incubators, an ecclesial innovation, education, and consulting group, and was named the 2024 Distinguished Leader in Innovation by the Wesleyan Impact Partners. An ordained United Methodist pastor, Kenda and her husband, Kevin, love hanging out with their hilarious grown kids and digging their toes in the sand on the Jersey Shore. And I know not everybody reads these, so that's why I read it out loud, but I need to say that Kenda and I have had lots of conversations on the phone. And you know, when you talk to someone and you have a spiritual connection with them and you know that you're friends for life, that's how I feel with Kenda. She is a person that is down to earth. She has a lot of knowledge that she's willing to share, and she makes you excited about being in the church today. And so would you please help me welcome Kenda?
Well, good morning, and thank you for incredible hospitality already. Thanks to Barbara and Eric and the team that made this possible. And I understand that today's follow-up is from a big band yesterday. I wish I could compete with that, but probably not going to happen that way. We're going to do a little bit of wandering around before we get started here. You each have a card on your, we're going to try the clicker and see how this goes here. He said, aim it anywhere. There we go, okay. You have a card, and what I'm going to ask you to do, maybe. I'll just keep aiming. The problem is not in your set. Oh, we don't want that one yet. We got to go back a few. Oh, well, not that far back. Sorry. Welcome to my learning curve. We got a few things out of order here. Just so I know. Okay, well, we'll just start anywhere. All right. You have a few cards in front of you that if you don't like the one that you're seated by, just find a different one on a table someplace. We're going to ask you to take a second, read through that card. And what that is, these are some cards. My students put these together. These are 100 different, what we call them faith-friendly Christian or faith-forward innovations in ministry. Some of them are through churches, some of them are nonprofits, some of them are campus ministries. They're all over the map, okay? Some of them are regional, some of them are very, very local, some are national. Anyway, you've got a whole range. Your goal is to find somebody with a different card from yours, which shouldn't be too hard. And you're going to have exactly like a minute to explain to the other person what the gist of your card is and to answer a question. Now, because we don't have them on the screen, you're going to have to listen to me, okay? So, the first round is this. Take a second. I hope you're reading through your card now, okay? On the back are a few of the details. Basically, this stuff was pulled off of their websites. And what you're going to do is you're going to find a partner. You're going to talk about which of these ministries you believe is the most creative. We're going to do this 4 times, okay? So the first question is, between you and your partner, which ministry do you find the most creative? Define that any way you want, okay? When you hear the chime, we're going to switch. Ready for pandemonium? Okay, go. Find a partner. Which is the most creative? We've got some slides missing here, which I'm just going to talk through.
Okay.
And when we get there, it looks like it'll pick up.
Okay.
That's great. Okay.
These are, yeah.
I don't know what went through. I didn't check WeTransfer to see what actually came through. I do know that tomorrow's is an incomplete deck, so maybe that happened with this one too.
Okay.
I'll send you another one.
All right, send me another one.
Yeah, I'll send you the full deck. I talked to Jen.
Okay.
Or Julie, sorry.
Cool. And I just wanted you to see what you had.
Yeah, that's good.
That's why I brought this up.
I appreciate that. That's good. All right, we're going to make a shift. All right, so now you're going to switch partners. And this time, I'm going to suggest you go to somebody at a different table. And you're going to answer this question. You ready? Which ministry do you think has the best use of resources? Go. Best use of resources. Go.
Let's go down here.
All right, we're going to make a switch. Find another partner. And this time the question is, which ministry has the most impact, do you think? Go. Most impact. Okay, we're going to switch one more time. And the last question is, which ministry smells most like church? Okay, go. All right, congratulations, you survived. Have a seat. Now, we're going to come back to some of these expressions of ministry a little bit later, but what we're going to talk about today are some of the experimentation that we are in as not just our denomination, but all denominations. In fact, institutions generally are in a period of experimentation. When I was in seminary, and I teach, among other things, youth and young adult ministry at Princeton, and a lot of the things that I've worried about over the last 30 years of my teaching is that, what are we going to do so that young people don't leave the church? That's not what we're worried about anymore. We're worried about everybody leaving church. We're worried about our identity as a church. We're worried about our purpose as a church. We're in kind of an existential crisis right at the moment. For one thing, we're not sure what it even means to be a congregation in a world where people don't congregate the way they used to. Yeah. Of course, you know about the financial crisis the churches are in. And, it's not just because people aren't giving, that's part of it, but the reason they're not giving is because there's a culture-wide loss of confidence in institutions. And what are we going to do about a church that has become an institution in a world that doesn't believe in institutions? Even though we use them all the time. There's a developmental kind of crisis that we're in as people, we're going to talk more about this, as people actually come to faith differently than they used to. And of course, there's the fact that the world's on fire. What are we going to do about that? There's that. Okay. Some of you might remember that H. Richard Niebuhr, who is a theologian a lot of us had to read in seminary, talked about the phenomenon of shipwreck. And what he meant by shipwreck is an experience in which the thing that you thought would hold utterly gives way. So if you are working with young people, one of the experiences of shipwreck that is most profound, not just with young people, but it shows up there a lot, is if their parents split up, right? The very fabric that they thought would hold their existence has utterly given way. And that leads us to the experience that we're going to talk about today. You remember these guys? Okay, Ursula the Sea Witch from The Little Mermaid. What was the name of the eels? Flotsam and Jetsam. Right. Well done. Because they sow chaos everywhere they go, right? And those are real words, not just names of Disney characters. Jetsam is the stuff that you throw overboard in order to stay afloat. Flotsam is the broken up parts of the ship that you thought would hold together. They're the broken materials bobbing around in the water that you're hanging onto. So I'd like you to take a second and just turn to the person beside you. You're going to want to talk to your whole table, but don't do that because that way not everybody gets to talk. And just pick one of these questions because these are questions that we need to be honest about the fact that we are asking right now. In the past few years, has anything come apart in your boat? In your ministry? In your faith? That you thought would hold? Has the church thrown anything overboard to stay afloat? Have you? And what do you find yourself clinging to in the wreckage? Just pick one of those questions. Have at it for about 3 minutes with the person beside you. Go. I know. Let's take deep existential questions. You don't have to do all three. All right, we're going to come back together. I know that was nowhere near enough time. But we're going to look at a story of shipwreck today. And it's one that you know pretty well, probably. It's from Acts 27, Paul's shipwreck that happened. We think it was in the September, October season. It was in the fall of the year, and the ship was a grain carrier, a grain freighter, and it was filled with grain to trade as they were on their way to take these prisoners to Rome. And Paul, being Paul, says this is a terrible idea. The weather's going to be terrible. You're going to wind up in the middle of a storm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Later he says, "Told you so." And but anyway, they go off anyhow. And of course, here's what happens: a violent wind, called a northeaster, rushed down from Crete. We were being pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day, they began to throw the ship's cargo overboard, jetsam. When no small tempest raged, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. But in the morning, the ship's crew didn't recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned to run the ship ashore if they could. Oops. So they made for the beach, but striking a reef, they ran the ship aground. The stern was being broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, but the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan, and he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest to follow, some on planks and others on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all 267 were brought safely to land. Now there's one more. After we had reached land safely, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The natives showed us unusual kindness. Since it had begun to rain and was cold, they kindled a fire and welcomed us all around it. I want to suggest that this story of shipwreck, it feels kind of familiar right now, but I also want to suggest that it's a story of hope. For one thing, nobody died, okay? But a few other things happened. There's some lessons that I take from this story that I think are helpful for us in the situation we find ourselves in today. The first lesson: the same ship that actually broke apart was actually also the ship that saved them. The pieces of that ship were what carried them to shore. And I take that to mean that just because the church as we remember it might feel like it's going to pieces, doesn't mean that God is not still using it to save us, right? Second, they found themselves on an unknown shore. I mean, they had no idea where they were. This feels like we've washed up on an unknown shore too. We don't know exactly what we've entered into at this period in our ministries. We didn't exactly sign up for this cultural context we're in. And of course, Paul and his companions have to ask, where are we? What is this place? They have to be told by the people who are already there that this is Malta. Well, they've never heard of Malta. They don't know what Malta is. It's like they have to learn this. It turns out that their old tools are at the bottom of the sea. All the people that they're used to dealing with aren't on Malta. This is a whole new culture that they have to address, right? And the people who are there, they're strangers, but they're not hostile. They're curious. They want to know about what happened, how'd you get here, what happened to the ship, etc. So they greeted them. They built a fire. As I imagine it, they sat around telling stories for a while. So they found themselves on an unknown shore, which is where we are as well. Whoops. Okay, I don't know what that one's doing here, but here we go. All right. The third one, let me set this one up a little bit. So Malta today is one of the most Christian countries in the world. It's about 95% Catholic. And Paul is the patron saint of Malta. And if you ask people on Malta, why is that? They'll say, well, because Paul saved Malta. Paul brought Christianity to Malta. And so every fall, there's a huge festival celebrating the shipwreck of Paul, right? And they have parades from one end of the island to the other where they carry relics, I don't know, Paul's little finger or something, to one end to whatever they think it is, from one end of the island to the other. And kids will throw flower petals down from the balconies, and the archways are festooned with flowers. It's beautiful. It's a big deal. It happens every year. Why? Because Paul saved Malta. The only problem with that is when I read this story, it kind of looks to me like Malta saved Paul, right? If that island hadn't been there, we'd be telling a very different story right now. And it makes me wonder that if Malta saved Paul, could this period of shipwreck that we find ourselves in be something God is using to save us? What if this period of disorientation in which we find ourselves as a church isn't to sink us, but to save us? So what we're going to do is talk today about doing ministry on Malta, because I think basically that's what we're all doing. We have unfamiliar terrain that we are on. We're not used to the tools and the resources that are here. I don't know, ChatGPT. How you doing on that? I mean, there are people who know how to use that stuff. They live on Malta. It turns out that there are people who have been on Malta a long time, including our own children. A lot of the people that we're working with now are unfamiliar to us. They're not the usual volunteers. We have 40% fewer volunteers than we did before the pandemic. Yep, you felt that. But the people who are out there, we don't know them. They're not our people, and yet they're the people God has given us to work with. Okay, so let's review for a minute. You know about this statistic. If you've heard about the nuns, these are the people who check, when they ask what's your religious affiliation, they check none. Nothing in particular, okay? That's especially common if you're in your 20s, young adults. Most of the research that I'm doing right now has to do with young adults, people 20-somethings. About 46% of them are Christian, about 44%, pretty close, are nuns, nothing in particular, okay? Now, what does that mean? The good news is, remember this is a story of good news. We're not going to die. The bad news is we're going to need a different boat, okay? The one that we're on doesn't work anymore, and so we're going to have to figure that out. And so what we're doing here is working with a group of people who are not just being less religious, They're being religious in different ways. So let's talk about that for a second. For one thing, religious engagement is no longer equated with belonging to a faith community. If you're a young person, it does not mean that if you want to be religious, you do not need to belong to any kind of faith community to do that, okay? That has profound implications for us as a Christian community, right? For another thing, religious identity in young people has become unbundled. That's the phrase used by Springtide Research. And what does that mean? Okay. Well, if your religious identity is unbundled, it means that these three circles that we equate with what the components of religious identity. If you've ever taken a sociology of religion class in college, you know about all this, right? Sociologists measure three things when they want to know how religious somebody is. They measure what they believe, they measure the communities they belong to, and they measure what you do, how you act, how you behave, okay? The problem is, and the idea was, when I was in seminary, what we were taught was the closer that those circles are together, the more solid your religious identity is. That's what you want, is to converge those circles. But here's the problem, though. When we look at the nuns and we take that data apart, it turns out you can be a nun in a whole lot of different ways. For one thing, you can be a nun and believe in God, okay? As you can see, some people are nuns because they don't believe any of this stuff, but it's a pretty small percentage, right? Some people are nuns because they don't belong to any kind of religious community or religious organization. And a lot of people say they're nuns because they don't act like Christians. This is highly concentrated in college freshmen. So if you can see that there's a small group in the middle that are all three. But being a nun is a complex phenomenon, and it describes a lot more people on Malta than we think. So I try to use Lady Gaga to explain this, okay? You know Lady Gaga, right? Now, she was raised and is a practicing Catholic. If you ask her, she strongly identifies with her Catholic identity. So her religious community is pretty clear what she belongs to, okay? Her religious practices look vaguely familiar as well. When she's home, she attends Mass. She goes to confession with her priest. She also does things like schedules her tour based on the astrological charts, okay? She did not learn that in CCD class. So her religious practices come from a lot of different places, not just from their Catholic upbringing. And then, finally, her religious beliefs also reflect a lot of influences outside of her Catholic upbringing. I hope I'm teaching people to worship themselves, is one thing she said. Again, her priest did not teach her that, right? So her faith is an example of what it looks like to have those circles unbundled, right? Now that's not a problem for her. She does not see that as compromising her Catholic identity, okay? It's a problem for us, but for the people on Malta, less so, right? Again, what is going on here? These random slides, just never mind. Anyway, so some of the things that have described our current younger generations are that they are massively spiritually curious. 40% of young women have an astrology app on their phone, right? A lot of them are your faithful church people. They're being religious in new ways, and it's not just because they're leaving church. And this is the thing I want you to pay attention to, because this is new. 43% of Generation Z nuns are not religious, not because they quit church, but because they were never there to begin with, right? What we are learning is this: about half of nuns were raised without religion. That's how they grew up. And that number's only going up, all right? Now, that is new for us. I spent 30 years of my career trying to get people back to church. Turns out, that's not the issue. The issue is the church has not been in their lives to begin with. Okay, so what are we going to do with that? I want to suggest that this is what it looks like on Malta, okay? And so the question that we have to ask is, what in the world is the church's job in this setting? Are we supposed to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, to bring those circles back together? Or are we supposed to draw a bigger circle? Or maybe, are we supposed to view faith from a different angle that allows us to see those circles differently, right? So we are faced with a lot of questions, and we don't know the answers to these yet. We are in a period of massive experimentation, trying to figure out, we're poking the box, trying to figure out what our response needs to be to this right now. But here's where I want to warn you. Here's what we've been told. The solution to everything is this. Okay. Yeah. If you just innovate, all will be well. Okay? I want to suggest... It looks different on Malta, folks. Here, let me give you the one, my students say this is the only party trick I know. Stick your finger up in the air, like this. Pretend there's a clock on the ceiling, and trace the outside of that clock going clockwise. That's to the right, by the way. Okay? Trace the outside of the clock going clockwise, okay? Don't change anything. Just slowly bring your finger down underneath your nose. Now, which way is your finger going? Counterclockwise. I know. It's a miracle. Okay, do it again. It's going clockwise. The one thing you'll remember from this, I know. Counterclockwise. And bring it down underneath your nose. And it's going the other direction. Why is that? Your perspective is different. You're looking at it from the other side of the clock. This is what we think we're doing when we are trying to form people in faith. We are trying to get them to see their lives from God's side of the clock. The fact of their lives doesn't change a lot of the times, but the reality they perceive is entirely different if they can see their lives from God's side of the clock. And the problem is, the research we have says this isn't happening. The effort that we are putting into Christian formation is not changing very much of anything at all. This is how, by the way, the fancy word for this is hermeneutics, right? The $10 word for a 10-cent concept. It just means what you perceive is conditioned by where you sit, right? Okay. Seeing things from God's side of the clock. Innovation is supposed to help that. But let me point out a couple things. First of all, what counts as church innovation has changed over the years. If you go back 30 years, some of you remember this. If you were going to be innovative, if you were going to fix church so people will come, that meant new music, new worship spaces, new ways of, preaching the sermon, get out from behind the pulpit, wander around, etc. And then people will come. They didn't. For a hot minute, maybe. Young people didn't come. They were like, this is super cheesy, And today, I think we're trying a different approach. I think this one's a little more Jesus-y. That when we are talking about innovation in churches, we're talking about new ways of being with people. New ways of coming alongside people because the body of Christ walks with people where they are. It's not a destination. More on that in a minute. Oh, geez. In case you wonder. Anyhow, here's the caution I want to leave us with. We need to innovate on innovation if we're Christians, right? We have a different plumb line than our partners in Silicon Valley. Our goal is never innovation. God is the innovator. Our goal is to partner with God in God's innovation, to jump on board. We're not going to out-innovate God. Creation, incarnation, redemption, resurrection. We're not going to beat that. Jump on board with God's innovation. That's the Christian story. But when we do that, when God is the innovator, it means our plumb line is different. For example, I'm going to create kind of a straw man argument here to make the point. In Silicon Valley, they are obsessed with great ideas. What is the next big idea? The thing is, we are not called to have big ideas. We're not called to have great ideas. We're called to have great love. Silicon Valley, you hear people talk about things making it bigger, faster, stronger. But we worship a God who became human, which means God got smaller and slower and more vulnerable. Silicon Valley is obsessed with the next new thing. That's fine. But Christians are more concerned with what's upside down, with what turns the tables as Jesus turned them, with what allows us to see the world from down under instead of from up top. What about your ministry is turning something upside down? That's what got Jason and his friends in trouble in the book of Acts. They're turning the world upside down. We need to stop them. Well, good for them. And finally, Silicon Valley is concerned with disruptive innovation so that they can change whole industries. That's fine. But what Christians are concerned with is sacrificial love, because there is nothing more disruptive than someone who will lay down their lives for their friends. So, we have a different set of metrics for what this looks like. Okay, so what does that mean? The first thing it means is, and we're going to talk more about this tomorrow, first thing it means is that we have a different understanding of what it means to be a Christian leader that is taking hold. Now, this is a quote from a former student of mine. 10 years from now, more people will have a spiritual director than a pastor. I actually don't think that's true, but it feels true. To her, it feels true. We think about chaplaincy as being something that happens in the military, on college campuses, in hospitals. But today, the growth industry in seminaries is training to become a chaplain, not an ordained pastor, right? Chaplains are simply spiritual leaders in secular spaces. More and more people are seeing themselves called to ministry in secular spaces than in church spaces, because they don't view change happening through churches. If they want to change something, they think they have to get into a different context. That's not true. But what is true is that now we have chaplains in workspaces. Now we have veterinarians have chaplains. When our cat was too sick to go on and we needed to put her to sleep, they sent a Lutheran pastor to help usher Snuggles into the great beyond. I know, it broke my heart and made me so thrilled at the same time. Okay, so the first is that we're changing the way we're thinking about leaders. The second is we're also changing what we think about as church. Church is less of a destination and more of something I'm going to call an embedded experience, right? So we have church becoming community spaces. These are just examples that some of these were on the cards. Some churches have dog parks. It's how they meet their neighbors. How they are being with people in new ways. Wonder Space is a ministry I love out of College Park Wesleyan in Marion, Indiana. There were no safe playgrounds in Marion, Indiana, and so this congregation said, well, we need to get kids a safe place they can play. So they collected a bunch of pool noodles and empty cardboard boxes and found an empty gym or warehouse and had pop-up playgrounds all over the city. Well, what else happens on playgrounds? Of course, the kids got to play. Parents start to connect, start to talk. That ministry has a lot of dimensions to it now that it didn't used to have. Churches as living space, this one is right here in Madison, Wisconsin, a Presbyterian campus ministry called Pres House, started by a couple of students of mine. They were, this was, 15 years ago or so. They were too wet behind the ears to know this was a terrible idea. They were like, they got there and there was not a single person in the campus ministry, and they were like, I don't know, what should we do? Let's build a dorm. So they built a dorm in a parking lot that today houses 200 students a year. And in addition to being a site for ministry of happening, all sorts of intentional communities, it also will fund that ministry to the tune of more than $1 million for perpetuity. Yeah. So church as living space. Church as nourishment space. Some of you have experimented with this if you have a community garden or a cafe or some kind of a gardening ministry of some sort, or a dinner church. Kanita Family Life Center is a youth-run farm on the eastern shore of North Carolina. I take my students to this place quite a bit because this is what happened was the adults, their health was plummeting in this community. They weren't eating healthy food. It was in a food desert. And so this pastor thought the solution to this is we need to grow our own food. And he asked the adults to help, and they're like, heck no, our family was sharecroppers. We're not going back to farming. But the kids said, I don't want you to die, so we'll do it. So the kids started the farm. The health improved the emergency room runs to that community plummeted to the point the hospital called to find out what was going on. And they're like, yeah, well, the pastor and a bunch of kids started a garden, Yeah, who knew? Church as workspace. This is a very common move in youth ministry right now, where instead of having an entertainment model of ministry on Sunday nights, where youth are participating in things that give them job training alongside faithful adults who are mentoring them along the way. This particular ministry was a group of pastors in Goshen, Indiana. At this one church, they're like, we can't get immigrant kids to come to anything. Well, the reason was they were working because they had to support their families. And so the church said, well, okay, what if we pay them? And so they started a worm farm where they create fertilizer from worm poop. The t-shirts say, we do poo, And these young people get paid and they work alongside faithful adults. It's a mentoring ministry. And this looks like a work ministry, but it's actually a grow space. Tri-Pie is a pie bakery in Iowa. It was started because the youth pastor was called in and the pastoral team said, so listen, we need to do a couple things. We need to do ministry with girls, and we need to solve racism. Go. She's 23 years old. Anyway, she calls together girls from different parts of the community. She sits in a room, she lays it out, says, here's what the challenge is. And one of the girls said, you know what this community needs? We need more pie. So they started a pie bakery and a church kitchen. It grew. It's now a brick and mortar store. It's got a food truck. It's won the award for the best nonprofit in that region for many years running. Kids get about $40 a week to come learn to bake pie, and on another day of the week, they kind of do ramped up confirmation. There it is again. Here's the question we're going to get. Oh yeah, this is great. These ideas that you have, they're wonderful, but is it really church? I had that question too. And then I got in a conversation with a former student of mine. The only people I ever talk to, it seems like, are former students. But anyway, he is now a Bible professor at Candler School of Theology. And he said, listen, his name's Ryan Bonfilio. He said, when Jesus was first resurrected, nobody recognized him at first. So what makes us think we're going to recognize the resurrected church at first either? Well, that got me thinking, yeah. And these are various images that you might recognize. We've got the Doubting Thomas story. We've got Jesus meeting at the tomb with Mary. We've got the fish fry on the beach. We've got the walk to Emmaus. And we have Jesus in the hat, which I'm pretty sure is scriptural, This is my favorite one, though. Diego Velázquez painted this in 1620. This is taking place, you can hear this, almost hear her thoughts. This enslaved girl or this servant, we don't know, is eavesdropping on a dinner happening out there. Do you know what that dinner is? It's the dinner after the walk to Emmaus, when they're inviting Jesus back, and they don't recognize him yet. But you can see the gears turning in her brain, right? Wait, she's like, wait. I know that voice. Wait, he's been here before. Wait, could that be? And it's almost as though this slave girl recognizes the risen Christ before his friends do. Which is a really Jesus-y thing to do, right? Remember the wedding at Cana? The first people to know that Jesus is up to something different with the water and the wine. It's not the bridal party. It's not the guest. Who is it? The servants. Which makes me wonder, what if the church is not the first group to which God's going to reveal the resurrected church? What if the people on Malta recognize the resurrected church before we do? I'm going to leave you with some questions to ponder before tomorrow morning. Okay, first, God is the innovator, not us. And if that's true, what does it look like to take part in God's big idea instead of trying to con God into participating in ours? Second, innovation won't save the church. Only Jesus Christ saves the church. So if that's true, are we clear about why we want to cultivate innovation in the church? Is it to be the body of Christ, or is it to save an institution? Third, maybe young people aren't leaving religion as much as they're changing what being religious means. You've got a couple tables of experts down here, folks. Congratulations for bringing these folks here. Let them be your truth tellers. If this is true, is that a threat to the church or an opportunity? And finally, okay, I'll come back to that tomorrow. What if the church looks different on Malta? Is it possible that we're not going to be the first people to whom God reveals the resurrected church? A lot of people ask me, because of what I do, so tell me what you see. What's on the horizon? What's the next big thing the church needs to be ready for? And I got to tell you, I've looked. I don't see a next big thing. What I see is Dunkirk. Do you remember the story of Dunkirk? Have you seen the movie, right? So the bottom line is this. What happened was there were a bunch of soldiers, British soldiers in World War II. They were trapped on a beach in Belgium. They couldn't get off the beach. They were sitting ducks for Axis forces that were coming for them. And ahead of them is just water. And they're waiting for a tanker to come in and take them home. What they don't know is that water is too shallow for a tanker. A tanker can't get in there. And so they are watching and they are looking out. If you've seen the movie, there's a scene where thousands of soldiers are just looking out and this is all they see. There is no big thing coming to save them. And they strain and they look, and what they don't realize is that Churchill has gotten on the radio and he has said to everybody on the southern coast of England, if you have a boat, can we use it? Because we've got to get these soldiers home. And so as they are watching the horizon, pretty soon they see this. Not a big thing coming to save them, but 1,000 little boats. 1,000 little boats. And they are all heading in the same direction. Now these little boats, some of these boats look pretty rickety. You know, not sure they're going to make it out of the garage, much less out across the English Channel. And some of them are big and shiny, right? Big boats can do things little boats can't do. If you got a big boat, that's good. But if you've got a little boat, it can go places big boats can't go, right? And so they suddenly realize that all of these boats are headed for them with one mission in mind, big or small, rickety or brand new. They are going to bring these soldiers home. And the truth is, it didn't matter what boat the soldiers got on, right? What mattered was that they got on a boat. And this is what it looked like on one of those boats. The truth is, I think this is the period that the church is into. We are in an era of 1,000 little experiments. And what God is saying is whatever little boat you've got in your garage, whatever little experiment you're tinkering with right now, we need it. Because there are people you know who are trapped on a beach somewhere and who need to come home. So whatever it is that you've got, whatever idea for ministry, whatever little experiment your congregation is doing, bring it out now. Now is when we need you. And all of these boats are going to be headed in one direction because we need to bring these people home. It doesn't matter where you start. It matters that you start. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.